Welcome, everyone, to the Knights of Columbus First Understand webinar series, a series of lectures and talks intended to open people's minds and give them the knowledge necessary to make thoughtful decisions for themselves. I'm your host, Donald Patty.
To begin tonight, from our battle with the British to the Tampa Bay Rays, America loves underdogs. We seem to relish the thought of a dreamer making it big, or the 80-pound weakling besting the champion, or even an actor going from rags to riches. Unfortunately, the stories of underdogs we would normally hear about Native Americans are lost to us because they occurred before recorded history. But last month, we heard the story of Christopher Columbus, a man who spent nearly a decade trying to persuade more than half a dozen different countries that he could go east by heading west. Today, we'll hear another story of underdogs, and one that's based right here in Montgomery County. It's the story of our neighbors' ancestors in search of their own slice of the American dream, battling both history and adversity. It's the story of the African-American community of Sugarland, just southeast of Poolesville in Montgomery County. Joining us from the Sugarland Ethno-History Project is Vice President Suzanne Johnson. I also have local historian Jeff Sipek, author of Becoming Charlemagne, Europe, Baghdad, and the Empires of 8800. He's also one of the authors of I Have Started for Canaan, the story of the African-American community of Sugarland, which is the subject of tonight's talk. Welcome, Suzanne and Jeff.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, great.
You're very welcome. I'm glad to have you here. So let's go ahead and get started. I believe, Jeff, you have a presentation prepared, and feel free to transition to Suzanne when you feel comfortable.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to start off and provide a little bit of background, and then Suzanne's going to tell you directly about Sugarland. Okay, let me do this. Okay, can you see my slide?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so unfortunately, Gwen Reese, who is the president of the Sugarland Project, was not able to be with us tonight, but she sent us along. Gwen and Suzanne and I have been working on this book for about 2 years. I am not African American, and I don't have deep roots in Western Upper Montgomery County. But the 2 years of work that I've put in on this is nothing compared to the decades of work that Gwen and Suzanne and the other Sugarland descendants put into this long before I came along. There's sort of been a really interesting tradition at Sugarland of protecting and preserving and collecting historical material. So when I came along a couple years ago, and I don't know if I've ever even told Suzanne this, when I drove to my first meeting with them, I fully expected that maybe there'd be enough material for a nice little booklet or a pamphlet or something like that. And boy, was I wrong. Their collection, I still have not seen the bottom of it. It's a remarkable, remarkable collection. And like I said, it represents decades and decades of work on the part of many people in the Sugarland community. So we've managed to put together a book that can introduce anybody of any level of interest to the history of this community. And the book serves multiple purposes. If you have only a casual interest in the subject or you want an introduction to the subject, about 2/3 of the book is just the basic history from emancipation to the present. And for many people, that's going to suffice. But there are also more than 30 pages of primary sources and notes and bibliographic material in the back, because we hope, and I hope, that some of the mysteries and some of the questions that remain will be picked up and looked into by people in the future. And we wanted to make sure we gave them the tools to do that. So everything is cited, everything is documented. And I'm really curious to see, now that this book is available, who comes forward with other stories, with other pictures, because there are still some gaps that remain and some stories that remain to be untold. So it's been really exciting for me to be involved in this. You can currently get a copy through the website of the Montgomery Countryside Alliance, and other local organizations and businesses are soon going to have copies as well. And you can see their URL. If you go to mocoalliance.org and you find their online shop, you can order a copy through the mail, and they will send you one. They've been very good friends to this project and the Sugarland Ethnohistory Project in general over the years. But let's go back a little bit. Before Suzanne tells you all about Sugarland and what their nonprofit has been doing, we thought it would be a good idea if I provided a brief introduction to the history of Black communities here in this rural area of upper western Montgomery County around Bellsville and Barnesville and Poolesville. And I hope you'll be impressed if this is something that's new to you. I hope you'll be impressed by how much Black history there is in the area, how rich it is, and how often you're in its presence when you're just driving through the area and maybe you don't even know that you've been in its presence all along. So I'm the food pantry coordinator for WUMCO Help, which is the emergency assistance nonprofit down in Poolesville. And when we talk about our service area, we often talk about our 5-town area, which is Poolesville, Bellsville, Barnesville, Dickerson, and Boyds. And those are the towns that correspond with the 5 zip codes in the area today. And that's the conventional wisdom that we have our 5-town area. But that conventional wisdom is very misleading, because if you look at this map, there are Poolesville, Bellsville, Barnesville, Dickerson, and Boyds. But let me fill out this map a little bit more. All of those names in red are historic African-American communities or settlements or neighborhoods or towns in the same western up-county area. And historically, all of these towns and communities have overlapped. They've all been connected by friendship and family and a sense of mutual support. And for the next couple of minutes, I just want to take you on a very quick tour of some of these communities, not all of them, there just isn't enough time. And even though they all overlapped and family members lived across the different communities and people attended each other's church rallies and so on and so forth, each community was distinctive then, and each one I've found has something distinctive to tell us now. So I want to start with Big Woods, which is just south of Barnesville and St. Mary's Church. This is the oldest known Black community in the area. And you've probably been, if you've taken Big Woods Road, that is kind of a shortcut from 109 up to Dickerson. That's actually a newer road. The entrance to the community is this picture that you're seeing off of 109. It's a private shared driveway, and there's a sawmill, operating sawmill back there now as well. It's a long gravel road, and people back there are still very private. And please don't go trespassing if you're curious. Now, not only is this the oldest known Black community in our area, it was also, as you can probably tell by the date of establishment of 1813, it was also a free community. And it was established in 1813 by a farmer named James Spencer. And it was enlarged in 1846 when Reverend Elijah Awkward, who was the pastor of several churches in the area, bought land and became one of the largest African-American landowners in the entire county. I think he's even on some of the 19th century atlases of the county, which is fairly rare for an African-American landowner. And at its height, the community had a church, a one-room schoolhouse, and a lodge. Several of the communities had these lodges that were mutual aid societies. You paid dues into them, and they helped you cover funeral expenses and healthcare expenses and things like that. And Big Woods is a revelation, I think, when you find out that there were Black communities, free Black communities, more than a half century before emancipation in Maryland in 1864. And I think it makes the pre-Civil War period around here much more complex and nuanced than maybe we assume it is. Now, as I mentioned, the community up there is very private, but Suzanne and I are aware of an archaeologist and anthropologist who has her eye on a couple spots up there. And so she may be doing some research up there in the future that could bring this community a little more to light, because really very little about it is documented. I just learned this week that the lodge still exists. The lodge was moved onto Big Woods Road in the 1950s and turned into a home. It has a new porch and it has new rooms added to the side, but the lodge still exists and people have been living in it for about 70 years, and it's a lovely home. And I'm just not going to mention the street address because they probably don't want people gawking as they drive by. I know one of the people who lives there. But this is another example of really important history, institutional history, right there on a road that I drive up several times a week. And until a few days ago, even though I've been researching this period and the subject, I didn't know it was there. So there's a great deal of untold history at Big Woods, and I think it's going to be really exciting as people start to talk a little more about it. Now, second in line, in terms of age, is Mount Ephraim. And if you've been up around the base of Sugarloaf Mountain and you've taken Mount Ephraim Road, which gets rougher around the base of the mountain the farther you go north, you may have passed these two buildings and didn't know what you were passing. There's the old church there, which I think is from about 1925, and the schoolhouse from 1910 that was built by, what was his name? Gordon Strong, who owned Sugarloaf Mountain. And he built that schoolhouse for the Black community there. Mount Ephraim was a community that was biracial. There were white families that lived there too. And the founder of it was said to be white, Black, and Native American. And some of the names that occur there, Bell, Proctor, Moody, and Hallman, those are still prominent African American names in our area today. About 15 families were living there around the year 1900, and the schoolhouse is really lovely. Suzanne and I had a chance to poke our heads in there back in probably about a year ago or so, when they were putting a new roof on the building, and we peeked inside, and there's still a lot of the original decor in there. And my hope is that the Sugarloaf Mountain folks are going to open that up for history tours at some point. The church is not in great shape, but hopefully at some point there'll be some renovation work on that as well. So again, another early free Black community in an out of the way location with a story that hasn't really been told up to this point. As we keep rolling along, if you've ever driven, as I'm sure many of you have, between Poolesville and the ferry, White's Ferry, you've driven right through Martinsburg. Martinsburg began as a biracial community before the Civil War, when it had a post office, a blacksmith, a general store, 30 to 40 homesteads. And what gives Martinsburg tremendous significance today is that it's the rare African American settlement that still has all three of the core community buildings. It has the church, which you can see there on the right. It's a lovely church inside and out with a really neat mural in the back. The mural representing the gospel train, which I think is very cool. You've got the schoolhouse there on the left, and that building in the back there with the red door is it's either the Loving Charity Hall or the Love and Charity Society Hall. This was another mutual aid society that helped you with funeral costs and healthcare and things like that. And that building was deteriorating until just a couple of years ago, when they got some grants and they raised some money to restore it and essentially rebuild it. So the exterior is done, and now they're putting plans in place, the last I heard, to work on the interior. So Martinsburg is extremely important historically in the area, and there are still descendants of Martinsburg that live right there in the area. If you're familiar with Pastor Chuck Copeland of our area's Hosanna Worship Center, he lives on property purchased by his ancestor, Albert Thompson, on this previous slide. And he is, Chuck, I believe, is the 5th generation to live on the property, and he has grandchildren who represent the 7th generation to spend time there and stay there. So this history is all around us, and it's not just history, it's our community today. Jonesville was little. Jonesville was more of a neighborhood. It wasn't a town. It didn't have a community hall. It didn't have a church. It relied on the neighboring community of Jerusalem for those things. And some of the names there, Jones, Harper, Martin, Hall, are African-American names that you still see in the western Up-County area. And what makes Jonesville important today, and what rescued Jonesville, I think, from being completely forgotten, is the fact that this house you see, this log home, is now in the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture. The entire house, stripped down to the very first version of it, without the insulation material between the logs, of course. And it represents in the museum two things. It represents the transition from slavery to freedom, but as the sign there indicates, it also represents the Jim Crow era and the era of segregation. Now, what's especially cool about the Jonesville house, and I hope if you go to the museum, you take advantage of this, you can go inside. And when you go inside, there are many, many photos from the Sugarland Project's collection, just to provide sort of some thoughtful touchstones to see faces and clothing and people, you know, people actually living up here in rural Montgomery County. And I've been in there when people have just focused very closely on the pictures, and I've heard them speculate about who the people were and how they might have lived. It's a very, very engaging exhibit at the museum, and it's in one of the lower levels as you work your way up through the layers of history back to the ground floor. So if you can get the passes now and go, definitely make sure you check that out. Historian George McDaniel, who did a lot of the research into the Black communities out here in the 70s, has called it the most visited African-American home in the world because of its place in the Smithsonian. And I think he's probably right about that. Now, next to Jonesville, on the outskirts of Poolesville, is Jerusalem, large major community. And you've probably driven down Jerusalem Road or Jerusalem Church Road if you live in the Poolesville area or pass through the Poolesville area. Now, just to the left of the photo, just outside of the frame, is the so-called beauty spot, which is the annex of the county dump, where you can only dump certain things and take certain materials. That's kind of a sore spot for those of us around here, that it doesn't really provide more services, but that's where the schoolhouse was. That's where the Jerusalem schoolhouse was at the time. And the core of the community is just down that road to the right. You go back there into the woods, and it's really, really a beautiful setting back there. There's some big new houses and lots of small, very old houses. And it's very cozy back there. Now, Jerusalem is especially interesting to me because it has two stories about its origin. The first story was that it was founded as a refugee camp by the Union Army in the early 1860s for runaway slaves from Virginia during the Civil War. And another story goes that it was founded by John Harper, who was farm labor, who was emancipated after the Civil War. And what's wonderful about that is I'm inclined to think both stories are true, because Jerusalem is the only African-American community in the Up County area by us that has two churches, or had two churches. The Baptist church at the core of the community that's over there on the right. And if you drive north out of Poolesville on the left, the former Elijah Methodist Church, which is now I believe a Spanish language Pentecostal church. And both these are not the original churches, but they're both built on the sites of the 19th century churches. So it's just my theory, but since almost all of the Black churches, really all of the Black churches in rural Montgomery County, they're almost all Methodist churches. So having a Baptist church up here is highly unusual. So I'm inclined to think that the refugees from Virginia seeking freedom and a new life and their family and their descendants were going to the Baptist church, while the folks who had a deep background here in the Poolesville area and had already been attending Methodist church or were practicing Methodists were making a slightly longer trip to Elijah Methodist. And I think that really, it suggests some really interesting stories about the religious practices around here and religious diversity in the area that, again, is not a story that has really been told before. And I don't know how I can confirm my theory, but I want to emphasize it's just a theory, but I think it's a very cool theory. And I'm going to be doing a little more research to see if I can confirm this. Now, because we're here with the Knights of Columbus today, I wanted to mention one more aspect of religious diversity in the African-American communities around here. I just want to mention this really quick. It's a little bit of a tangent, and it's something that turned up in the Sugarland Church Ledger from the 1880s and 1890s. Now, the Sugarland Church Ledger is a gold mine because the pastors and the church secretaries didn't just record membership and baptisms and deaths and weddings. They used it as a sort of community notebook. And if you read the book we've put together, there are ample excerpts from it because it puts you right there in the community, and it takes you into their disputes, and it takes you into their hopes and their cares, and it's full of memorials for the dead as well, including the most touching one, to my mind, is the father recording the death of his adolescent son and the conversations they were having on their deathbed. It's a tough one to read. And Suzanne told me when she handed me a copy, she said, "You'll learn to read the handwriting and you'll get chills." And boy, was she right about that. So the one that really stands out that I think is worth mentioning tonight is this brief remembrance of Maria Jackson, which goes, "In remembrance of Mrs. Maria Jackson, who departed this life March 10th, 1888. She was born year of 1810, Catholic lady she was, a good neighbor she was. She left 3 children, Mrs. Henrietta Johnson and George Angel and Mrs. Dunlop, to mourn her loss. But she is gone, gone to rest above." Now, there's very, very little documentation of Black Catholics in the area. So I find this hugely interesting, especially since the only Catholic church for miles was, of course, St. Mary's up in Barnesville. So Maria Jackson's another example of a more complex, nuanced religious and social history than I think many of us at first glance would really expect. And I don't know if St. Mary's has records from before the 1900 fire, but this is something that I would also like to look into down the road, because this was a surprise to me when I came across it. And there's a story there, I think, that's waiting to be told. So now that you've gotten this quick introduction to a few of the Black communities in our area, I hope you see just how much they had going on, how important they were to the area. In the 19th century, the African-American population was 1/3 of the population of Montgomery County. So these were not marginal communities and a marginal population by any means. And the people who lived in these communities were blacksmiths, they raised horses, they were laborers on the farms of large white farm owners. They were domestics in neighboring homes. They were stonecutters at the local quarries at Dickerson and down at Seneca. They performed all kinds of other tasks in the area and played all kinds of roles in the area. And they were really essential to local society and the local economy. Now, not only were these communities closely knit and connected to each other, they were also connected to the local white communities and towns, despite really strict segregation and prejudice. And it's interesting, a 1940 study of the county showed that Black and white neighbors had more cordial dealings with each other out here in the rural areas than they did in the closer in suburbs. And I thought that was interesting to note. And I think the best example of this is Amelia Hebron, whose picture you see down there in the lower right. She's the great-grandmother of Gwen Reese, who is the president of the Sugarland Ethnohistory Project. And over the summer, after the book was put together and just about ready to go to press, we were made aware of this incredible birth register for the Poolesville area from 1914 to 1928. And we dug into this and we all just said, wow, I can't believe, what a gold mine this is for researchers. And, between 1940 and 1928, Amelia Hebron delivered dozens of babies along with the local doctor in the area, Dr. Nurse, and other midwives. And I think what stood out for me the most is that Amelia Hebron delivered a lot of Black babies, but also quite a few white babies as well. So it wasn't always the white doctor delivering the white babies. And there's really no stronger connection between white and Black neighbors than when you're helping deliver somebody's children. That's potentially a lifelong connection, even in the face of all the prejudice at the time. So, just in conclusion, I hope you've liked this really whirlwind barnstorming tour of some of these communities. There's a lot more that we could say about them, and maybe down the road we'll have a chance to do that. But what I really want to emphasize by way of context for what Suzanne is going to talk about is that the histories of in this area of white families and Black families and white towns and Black towns They're all intertwined. They're all different strands of one larger story. And the lesson for me in the last couple of years, as I've had the honor to be a part of sharing this history and bringing this history to light, is that it really shows how we all need each other then and now. Now, just one final note. I've used the past tense to describe these communities, but some of them still exist as neighborhoods with deep family roots and shared connections, and still revolving around some of the churches in those communities where the congregations go back to the 1870s. And I know, as many of you probably do, several people around here who are descended from these historic communities, and their roots go as deep, sometimes deeper than a lot of the white families around here. And today they work at local schools and they run businesses and they volunteer for local nonprofits alongside their white neighbors. A Jerusalem descendant helped found the Wumco Food Pantry in the 1970s. As I mentioned, Chuck Copeland, pastor, descended from Martinsburg, the pastor of a local church. A Sugarland descendant runs the security team at a local school, and so on and so forth. The more I've gotten to know the names, the more I've recognized that people I know who are friends and acquaintances and colleagues are descendants with hundreds of years of history in the area. And I think just by the simple act of knowing and acknowledging that, I think it takes all of us, when we have these kinds of conversations, it takes all of us a little bit closer to a sense of mutual understanding going forward. Uh, so that, I know I talked really fast. I just wanted to make sure we left enough time for everything else. But now that you have context, I'm really pleased to turn things over to my good friend Suzanne, because the Sugarland story is well documented. I think it's probably right now the best documented uh, story of all of the Black communities in the area. And she's going to give you a sense of what makes and made and still makes that community distinctive indeed. So take it away, Suzanne.
Okay. As I stated before, I spent most of my childhood in Prince George's County, but the fun part of each summer was going up to my granddaddy's house in Sugarland. Always had fun up there with my cousins. It was quite a different trip for me from Prince George's County to going up to Montgomery County because they had a pump, we didn't. They had outhouses, we didn't. My grandfather had a working farm with pigs and chickens and grew vegetables and things like that. So all that was new to me. But I loved going up there. Little did I know the history of that particular community. After I started working with Gwen about 10 years ago, um, I learned more about Sugarland than I ever knew existed. The slide that you're looking at right now is a picture of the St. Paul Community Church as it is today. It has looked like that since 1893. That particular building was built in 1893. And the other picture that you see there are some of the headstones of the cemetery. The whole area was developed by the former slaves after emancipation who bought land from the white landowners, the Pleasants and the Webbs. And each person got their own piece of land. Most of it was by a gentleman's agreement, which is just a handshake, but they worked together as a community. They were indeed a community. If a house needed to be built, everybody helped. If it was time to slaughter hogs and cure the meat, everybody helped. If it was time to harvest vegetables or fruit, everybody helped and everybody went home with something to eat. The main heart of this community, though, is the church. The original church was built in 1871. That burned, and the second church was built shortly after that. The church that, like I said, that's there now was built in 1893. The church previous to this one was also used as a school building until the present church was built. But the community, as Jeff mentioned before, Sugarland had a church, a cemetery, a school, a store, a post office, and a rehearsal hall for a group of gentlemen who formed a cornet band, my great grandfather being one of them. The trustees or the landowners, when they purchased the land for the church and the other properties in 1871, paid $25, and which, like I said, with the handshake, with the gentleman's agreement, and started working. The community grew and thrived because, like I've said before, everybody helped everybody else to get what they needed to have and what needed to help them to thrive. The next slide that you see there is a picture of the school. Well, the picture that you see there now is a house, but it was originally the school building. Talking with my mother, she mentioned that between the two windows used to be the front door. And she went to this particular school. So did my grandfather. It was down the road a bit from the church. And the picture that you see there of the school children, that was a picture that was taken about 1932. Just about everyone in that particular picture now is deceased, except my mother, who is 98 years old, and she's still there. She's still with us, thank God. Um, my grandfather used to go to make sure that the building was warmed up and everything was in place for the children. And he did the similar things for the house, for the church, excuse me. Gwen Reese, who is the authority on Sugarland history, um, told most of the history that is there is because she lived it, and what she didn't live, people around her, her relatives, told her what Sugarland was like. Um, After the community had gotten bigger, just like everywhere else, it got smaller. People grew up, young folks didn't want to be there, so they left, and the community itself had gotten much, much smaller. The church, that wasn't, the community had gone down, so there was not a lot of use for the church at that time. And at one point, it was closed and locked. Gwen, who went to that church as a child, as we all did, felt that it needed to be reborn. It was in disrepair, and in the mid 1990s, she spearheaded a group of people, mostly relatives and friends, to rebuild the church, to paint, to fix the pews, to carpet, to get it back into a working building. And for a while, it was a community church, and that's why it has the name that it does now. In 1996, with the help of Dr. Blakey and students from Howard University, worked together to get the name for the Ethnohistory Project. But I'll speak a little bit more about that later. You can go to the next slide, Jeff. Okay. As going back to how they worked together, at one point, there was one well that everyone could get their water from. And that's the picture you see there on the left. The picture on the right shows after the pump was installed. That particular well is still there. We don't know whether it's functioning because we've gotten it closed off, sealed off so that no one would go into in there. But if you look at that picture, you might recognize it because it's the picture that's on the front of our book. And I'm proud to say it's also in the Museum of African American History and Culture. And the even more prouder part of it is that my mother, my aunt, my uncle, and cousins are on that picture also. But it just showed how the grown-ups took care of the children because they came to bring their buckets to get the water. They couldn't do it, so Mr. Sam Jackson did it for them. But that's the way the community was. They always worked together. They used the church also for meetings and services. But if there was a problem in the community, they had their own little system as far as taking care of those things too. But they always talked it through. Jeff mentioned the ledger, which was a wealth of information. I did not realize at that point at one point that Gwen even had it. We kind of got it from a cousin of hers, but thank God. I had copied it before, but we have the original in a very safe place. But as Jeff mentioned, there's a wealth of information in that book that we are so glad to have now. Okay, Jeff, you can move it up a little bit. Now, this is when they had finished the renovations, excuse me, and this was a ceremony where they were cutting the ribbon because the church was back to its wonderful form. We also got a roadside sign, if you're down that way, that you can see a little more of the history of Sugarland. It was Gwen's vision at the time, and all of ours now that I'm working with, that we are all working with her, that the church now, since it's not being used for regular Sunday services, is being used to store the wealth of artifacts and pictures and documents and books that we have as part of the Ethnohistory Project. One thing I always mention to people when Gwen and I first started working together, she found some books in a building that used to be the hall that's no longer there, and she brought these books, and they were school books that she had saved that had the date of 1880 in the front of them, and those were the books that the actual school books that the children used. She also was able to save the Bible out of the 1871 church that survived the fire that has singe marks on it. So we have very, very valuable, irreplaceable things in that building that we plan to continue to preserve. That's the inside of the church. It's a museum right now. It has lots of artifacts, lots of pictures, lots of documents. Gwen has managed to save lots of homegoing programs, which gives you a wealth of information about the families that grew up there. Since we um, since there was information about the school in the picture, we kind of set up a little schoolroom over there. So our vision, when we get our museum put up, all of this is going in there. The church has the original floors are still there under the carpet that we would like to get done. The original pews are there. And it's just a wealth of information. As a child, I remember walking into that church. And when I started working with Gwen and walked into it again, it was like I went back to when I was 6, 7 years old. It like nothing had changed. So, okay, Jeff, we can move up now. All right, cemetery project. As far as the ethnohistory project and what it's involved in now, as I mentioned before, mostly documentation and preserving the history of Sugarland. Thanks to Jeff and all the stuff that we threw at him, we now have a book about all this history. And part of another vision of ours was to get the cemetery documented. Gwen and I had started working with the records that she had from the ledger, and Snowden's Funeral Home buried a lot of people up there. So they were able to give us a lot of information also. But we decided to try to get the cemetery documented. So with the help of Glenn Wallace and Eileen McGuckian and Ann Allnut, we were able to get them out because Glenn did Monocacy Cemetery. So he came out and helped us with ours. And the day that they were out laying the yellow cord to cordon things off was amazing. But due to that and Ann's work, we've got a good document that has who's where that we know of, and a lot of information that we've looked up from Ancestry and lots of other places, so that anyone who wants to come and research will have a wealth of information that they can look at right there in the original Sugarland community. Okay, Jack. Now, we could not do this without the help of our friends. And I just wanted to give you an idea of all of the organizations and groups that we are partners with that has helped us immensely to do the job that we set out to do. As far as the Ethnohistory Project's future plans, like I mentioned before, we really are planning on building a museum to house all of the artifacts and things that we have. So if anybody knows Jeff Bezos on speed dial, do that for us, please. We have also an archaeology project that's going to help us to research the lot that's adjacent to the church. That 2 acres of land was given to the Sugarland Ethnohistory Project, and that particular piece of land also has the well on it. So we've got the well along with everything else that we have as far as Sugarland goes. The grants and things have helped us to be able to replace the roof on the church because 120 some year old church needs a new roof. The floors we would like to have original hardwoods because they're under the carpet. The pews need to be refinished and part of the benches replaced. We have a handicap ramp, lots of different things that we want to get done. And we've been able to get some grants from our friends. And we're well on our way. The museum is the biggest piece, but that's going to come too. I know it will. I know that was very quick. Jeff talks about talking fast, but I used to teach 2 classes of kindergarten a day. So I'm still trying to slow myself down after all those years. But when you go back to Sugarland, if you've ever been there once, you will never forget it. It's a beautiful, quiet place up in the beautiful sugar maple trees. And I thank you again for having us and for listening.
Great. Thank you, Suzanne. And thank you, Jeff, as well. So I'm assuming we have a few questions out there from members of our audience. Does anyone want to open with a question for either Suzanne or for Jeff?
Yeah, for either of them. This is Dennis Conley. What was the arrangement? I understand the Sugarland Church, St. Paul's, was used in a movie. How did that come about?
There's so much stuff in my head, I forgot. Yes, we were involved in a movie called Philomena back in 2012. And they were looking for a little white church in the country to do this movie. And we have a little white church in the country. They changed it with they changed it because they needed a Catholic church. So if you didn't know that Sugarland was a United Methodist church before, you would never know it by the time they got finished the inside. But we were able to work with Judy Dench and the director that came all the way from England. They came the week before and talked to us. And then about 2 weeks or so later, they came with all their equipment, and we were even extras in the movie. So if you see it, it's Philomena with Judy Dench. 1 hour and 7 minutes into the film, you'll see us. But thanks for the question. That was amazing. That was the day, the election day. So they waited for us to get through voting in order to come to be in the movies. But they were wonderful people. Wonderful.
All right. Thank you, Dennis, for asking that question. Other questions?
I wanted to know how soon, I know that I wanted to get the address again, where to purchase the book. So actually, Suzanne is actually my cousin. Catherine Hebron was my grandmother. So I spent many a summers family reunion every year, getting our water and our peacocks and pulling peacocks is all of our, taking our feathers home. These were like our souvenirs every year. So that's one of the highlights of my childhood. So I appreciate you guys for doing this. It's actually the first time that I went to the museum and just happened to be in that exhibit. And I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw Sugarland and like did a double take and was like, wait a minute, I gotta take a picture. Like this is our home. So this is so very, very exciting for me and my family. So my mom's on here, Brenda Dyson, and Catherine Hebron, like I said, is my grandmother. And so, like I said, for us, we did the hay rides. I mean, we went to my Uncle Bill's farm every year, and we saw the pigs. And I mean, so that for me, it just brought all of those memories back when Suzanne just started talking about the water and the well, because we all bought our empty gallon of milk cartons there to take our spring water back home, and our peacocks. And so just great memories as a kid. And unfortunately, we didn't keep the tradition up as long as I would have. I would have liked for my daughter to be able to experience the same thing that I did as a kid. But this is history that we can all keep in our family and keep dear to us. So thank you, Suzanne and Jeff and all of you guys who helped put this project together to tell the history of our family. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And this is the first I'm hearing about peacocks. And it just goes to show that even after
I'm
2
sure
years,
she knows what I'm talking about.
after being immersed in all of the history for 2 years, there's still so much more, and that's one thing about this book. It's not, Suzanne and I've joked about this before. It's not the Sugarland Encyclopedia, so it doesn't have everybody and everything in it. It's really a first attempt to tell the history for anybody who might be interested in it. And we've said we would fully expect that people are going to appear with new stories, new pictures, new documents, to fill in some of the holes and document some of the mysteries. And it's been a revelation for me, because like I said, I thought, okay, they'll have enough to do a pamphlet, and no, not at all.
Now, Jeff, both Tyra and Anne, who's on the call, asked about how they can get a hold of the book. Can you repeat that? It sounded like there were some detailed instructions there. Perhaps, yeah, go ahead.
Right now, the main way to order a copy is mocoalliance.org. And if you find their buying link, their shop link on their website, it's moco-alliance.org/buy-mca-gear.html. But if you go to mocoalliance.org, and I think it's about us, and then the Sugarland project is going to have a shopping cart system on their website pretty soon. A couple other organizations are going to be selling the book. There's a new cafe and market in Poolesville that should have copies really soon. I just dropped them off there, called Locals, right there in the core of town. And so there are going to be other ways soon to get the word out. But the good people at the Montgomery Countryside Alliance are the first ones who are making it available. They'll ship it to you, fairly inexpensive shipping. And so we should point out, as Suzanne's talking about all the partners and helpers, Caroline Taylor at the Montgomery Countryside Alliance has been a huge help in getting this out there while the other tech issues get resolved.
A question I'd like to ask is for Jeff.
Mm-hmm.
Really, I have ties in Sugarland. My name is Jeff also, by the way.
Hi.
I have ties in Sugarland as well as Big Woods. So
Okay.
Enjoyed your information that you gave on Big Woods.
Sure. You may know more than most people know about Big Woods if you've got roots there. It's as you know, it's fairly private, and a lot of the older families in Big Woods just have not been, for whatever reason. There's a book I have here, if you could see me on the little screen. Historian George McDaniel came through in the 1970s and wrote this book, Black Historical Resources in Upper Western Montgomery County, Maryland. And this book is pretty much impossible to find on the aftermarket. And it was a sign that I was in the right place and doing the right thing, that when I started this project and Gwen and Suzanne told me about this book, I went on eBay and I was able to bargain for a copy that is in practically like new condition. It's like nobody ever read it or touched it. And that was a little eerie. And there has not been a copy on the market online anytime since. And George McDaniel has since gone down. He was the director of Drayton Hall in South Carolina. And he really pioneered years ago getting the descendants of the white families and the black families to come together and talk to each other and share the history and make sure that their historical site represented everybody's history. And but anyway, I mentioned his book because the chapter on Big Woods is not as full as the chapters on some of the other communities. It was just a community where there were fewer people who spoke about their history when he approached them in the 70s for whatever reason. So if at some point, if you know stuff, and I understand sometimes people don't want to share certain things about their families or about their history, but no matter who you are, where you're from, white, black, whatever. If you do know something interesting about your family and you don't want to share it yet, write it down and put it in an envelope and leave it for people to find later, because one story, one piece of information, one letter can change the whole historical picture.
I was going to say, well, I'm 50, so I don't have a lot of knowledge about early settlement in Big Woods, but my family is still there. I still have
Okay.
family in that area. And,
What's your last name by chance?
I'm sorry?
What's your last name?
My last name is Jenkins.
Jenkins, okay.
Yeah, my grandma bought like 5 acres.
There is, in the picture, the picture, it's in the book, and it was one of the slides I showed with a bunch of men standing in front of a building. And I think there are 1 or 2 men with the last name Jenkins in that picture.
Okay. I have the book, but I haven't read it yet.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah, if you look, at, we put an index in the book so people can find if they've got any relatives who are either in the pictures or in the text, and they should be in the index under Jenkins. So take a look and see, you might have a family member in one of these pictures.
I definitely will do that. Well,
Awesome.
any more research on Big Woods yourself?
I might. There are so many of these outstanding questions, these little questions that have arisen, that I do want to do more research. I just have to decide what it is I'm going to do. And that archaeologist Suzanne mentioned also has her eye on a project somewhere up at Big Woods. And I think the Sugarland project that she wants to do is sort of a way of getting her feet wet on this. She's very, very interested in the history of both communities. So that history might unfold within the next couple of years. I hope it does, because the history of the old, especially since it's the oldest free Black community in the whole area, there's got to be quite a story there.
Thanks for the presentation tonight, and I really appreciate it.
Sure. Thank you for coming. Were there some questions in the chat?
Hello. Oh, I have a question.
Yeah, another question. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, my name is Clifford Woods. I live in Prince George's County. I'm also a member of the Knights of Columbus. Thank you for showing this. And I'm also a member of the African American and Genealogical Society of Prince George's County. And I was just wondering if Ms. Johnson would be able to, or someone would be able to give a presentation to our group at some time in the future, either viral or.
I'll see what I can do. I'll talk to my friend that's in the group, Ellen Amy.
Oh, okay, so you know someone in the group?
Oh yeah, Ellen and I are good friends. So yeah, we might be able to work something out. Well, I'll talk to her.
Great. She's in Prince George's County chapter, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.
All right. We do have a question that came in through chat. Let's see. So if someone wanted to visit Sugarland, let's start this way. How can someone find Sugarland? So pretend that perhaps you're not from Poolesville, you're not from Western, you're not from Montgomery County. How do you work your way to Sugarland?
Well, since I come from Prince George's County, up there every day, once a week at least, I usually go up 28 and turn on Seneca Road, make a left onto Seneca Road, and go down to Partnership Road. Follow Partnership all the way up to Sugarland Road, make a left, and you'll see the church.
And
All right, great.
Some people go up where 107 and 28 split. You can go that way too. Because as soon as you make that left onto 107, Sugarland Road is the next turn. So there's a couple ways to get there, but that's where it is.
Great. And if someone wanted to see or visit the inside of the church, is that ever open or available for people to tour?
Usually up until the pandemic, if you called either Gwen or I, we could make a time that you could go up and we could open the door and let you see inside and walk around the grounds if you wanted to. So probably either contact me or Jeff or Gwen, and if they wanted to go, maybe we can make some arrangements to get up there. But it's been closed since, when did we start this? March. So we would have some work to do, but they're welcome to come in. Just give us a call.
And I want to put in a plug for Heritage Weekend, when Montgomery County does Heritage Weekend, when all of the smaller historical sites are open for 1 or 2 days of the weekend. That obviously it didn't happen this year because of the pandemic, but it happened last year in 2019, and it really is a blast. They always make sure they've got music. There was a choir there. It was 3 women who sounded like 100 women. And that was kind of a funny thing for me last year, because I thought there were going to be more outsiders. So I got up at the pulpit and started talking about the importance of Black history to a church full of Sugarland descendants. And I thought, okay, I'm literally preaching to the choir here. But so I would just encourage people, if you're not a descendant, not connected to the community, everybody is welcome when we get back to doing those kinds of events in Montgomery County. Come on out. I know Gwen's plan this year, the pandemic put on hold, was to be open both days and to have music and presentations and events and talks and also and tours and all sorts of things. So I'm really looking forward to that, also because there are some historic sites in the county I want to take a look at as well.
And although things are closed right now on the interior, you could go and visit the exterior during the day. And there's information online as well. Did you have a little bit more information on that? Suzanne, do you remember?
Well, we've got our Facebook pages up now, but yeah, you can feel free to go up and walk around the church and the cemetery, even though we're not there. But there is the entrance is kind of chained across, but you can park on the road and walk. We just stopped big vehicles from coming in there because we had a little problem one day with them. But no, that won't be a problem at all.
Great. And I believe I did a little background research about this talk and did so visiting sugarlandproject.org. So
Yeah.
that's another place you could go, is www.sugarlandproject.org.
Yes, that's our website.
Okay, great. So I have a couple questions that are going to seem trivial, but I think they're kind of interesting. Why was Sugarland named Sugarland? Do we have an idea of that?
Okay, there's a legend, and then there's the truth. The legend is that they named the area Sugarland because the women were as sweet as sugar. But in truth, it's the sugar maple trees that surround the area. But it's been named Sugarland since the 1700s.
Mhm.
That tract of land.
All right, interesting.
And
So
if you go across the Potomac, there's an area called Sugarland Run in Virginia as well. So it seems to have been a name that, going back to as far as the 1600s, 1700s, applied to both sides of the Potomac in this area.
All right, good to hear. The book name, I Have Started for Canaan. How did you choose that name?
Okay, that's
I'm going to take
that.
We've talked about this church ledger, and the church ledger is, if you're writing about history, the church ledger is a historian's dream, because it really it puts you right there with the people who are writing things down practically in their own voices. I mean, you hear it coming right off the page. And one of the things in the ledger is this hymn that was popular in the 19th century, "I Have Started for Canaan," which was sung to the tune of "Home Sweet Home," which was one of the most popular songs of the 19th century. So hymn writers, hymn composers, were using the familiar music and writing Christian lyrics to go along with the popular songs. And somebody wrote down this hymn with a few little changes, probably personal changes, in the ledger, word for word. And we put the words to that and a picture of the handwriting in the appendix in the back of the book. It's just knowing that it was a song that was surely sung at the church, that was meaningful to one of the pastors or a church secretary. It just kind of jumped out early on, and somehow it just kind of became the title of the book. I don't know if we had a backup title. Did we, Suzanne? I don't remember.
Not really.
No. So it's just
backup, but yeah, we didn't really have another one. That's another one of those things that's supposed to be there.
Yeah, and it just sort of evokes it evokes this attempt to reach a promised land
Yeah.
that I think really resonated, because I have to say, when I signed on, I drove down. I hadn't met Gwen and Suzanne yet. I love and adore them now. We're tight, but I didn't know them. I'd never met them. I didn't know anything about Sugarland. I drove down, and I thought, okay, this is going to be interesting. We'll see what happens. I really I expected that this would be a short book. I expected it would be kind of a sad story about a lot of oppression and a lot of racism and a lot of hard times. And is all of that there? Yeah, absolutely. But it's a story. It's their sources and their documents told from the inside out. And I've come away from working on this book very inspired, because you see on every page people just doing what they needed to do, getting the job done, not worrying about what obstacles were in their way, going from having zero rights at all and zero freedoms at all to building a church, building a school, building community institutions, forming ties with local communities, forming chapters of national organizations within the different communities. It was far more detailed and really far more hopeful than I think I expected, coming in with I guess assumptions of my own. And I'm just really pleased that we can share this with everybody. I'm glad I was able to be a part of it.
Can I? Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Brenda Dyson. I'm Tyra Dyson's mom. My mother was Catherine Hepburn, and this is our history, and I just want to share this note. I had 5 uncles: Robert, Richard, Elijah. Oh God. Oh Lord Jesus, Philip and Melvin. And these guys, they sang in that church on Sunday. When we had family reunion and went down home, Jesus, man, you talking about, you want to hear a heavenly body sing praises to the Lord? Jesus, my uncles used to come to town in DC, and every time they would see those 3 cars pull up in front of my yard, everybody in that block would be on their front porch. They hear those heaven boys sing, child. I'm trying to tell you. Now, y'all know I know what I'm talking about. Them boys, and the women too. Aunt Mildred, oh my God. Aunt Henrietta, those women can sing, y'all. God Almighty, baby. When you left Sugarland, you were full, you were loved, you were secure, and you couldn't wait to get back. But when you get up, when you turn off Sugarland, laying down and to go down that hill from that church, there were two shepherds and a rock waller, Cousin Bill Lyle's dogs, would meet you at the top of that hill. And you couldn't get out that ride till you got down there where that trailer was. Am I right, y'all? You could not get out of your car until you came all the way down that hill where Cousin Bill Lyle had his trailer at. Now he went in the service. Oh my God, I miss my family. He went in the service, and my mom used to own. As a matter of fact, a lot of our kinfolk, my mother's brothers and sisters, used to own some of that land. But you know how it is when you're raised in the country, you want to get to the big city, you see. So they sold some of their land and came to DC. Child, please, if I'd have known, I guess they say if I'd known now what I knew, if I'd known then what I know now, I'd have never gave up my property. Well, but I thank God that Sugarland is still a force to be reckoned with. And I thank God that I have that legacy for my great grandbabies.
Good, good.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Brenda. I really appreciate that.
You're welcome, beloved.
Yeah.
You are welcome.
And for those who are interested, I did mention the sugarlandproject.org website, but one of the things I found that was fantastic about that website is there's some great photographs there. I'm sure you mentioned your family name was Hebron, is that correct?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, there are photographs of some of your family members on the site, and the photographs are just fantastic. If you spend a little bit of time looking at some of those portraits, you really get a feel for what the individuals were like just from looking at their portraits.
Lord. Yes, Lord. we were simple folk, but they love hard and they work harder.
Yep.
Ain't no doubt about that.
We're running up on 9:10 p.m. Is there one last question before we close? If not, I'll ask one.
I have a question.
Okay.
Great, go ahead.
Well, Sugarland was founded in 1813, I think you said earlier, which
1870.
meant that they went through the Civil War. Is there anything in the book that talks about the Civil War of the people in Sugarland as to how they were living during that period of time?
The first land record at Sugarland pops up in 1871. The older communities were Big Woods and Mount Ephraim. Sugarland, though, even though the first land record is from 1871, I'm convinced that there were people living there earlier. One of the earlier names of the town was Curtisville, because if the Dawsons can have Dawsonville, the Curtises can have Curtisville. And my hunch, and there's really no documentation of this, but my hunch is that the Curtises were there first, and I don't think we know how long before they were there. But there's no record. There's finally records around 1871. There is a little bit about the Civil War in the front of the book, about just to give a little bit of context for the lead up to emancipation. But there were also people at Sugarland who served in the Civil War. One of the biggest landowners at Sugarland was named John Henry Adams, and he was from Kentucky, and he saw action all throughout the Civil War. And after he was done with the Civil War, somehow he got mustered out in DC and decided to come up to Montgomery County and set up shop in Sugarland. And he was there for a while, and his son shows up in the records. He named his son John Quincy Adams. And they were down at the end of Sugarland Lane. And I don't really know, I don't know what becomes of the Adams family. And if I know they married into some of the other families, but there were a couple of Civil War veterans in the community for sure. And that's another subject that is understudied, is Black service in the Civil War up in this area of the county. And one of the mysteries that's in this book as well is there's an incredible picture of a young man serving in World War I. And even though in the Sugarland collection, this is another thing Suzanne knows, so many times during this process, Suzanne would show me, and Gwen would show me something, and my mouth would hang open. And Suzanne would just look at me and say, close your mouth, close your mouth. The photo collection is unbelievable because they know the names of almost everybody in the photos. And this one young man is the exception. So I did some research into African-American soldiers during World War I, and that's another area that somebody could really dig into as a personal project, a school project, a scholarly project. So the Civil War and World War I are, again, understudied. It's why, not to toot our own horn here, but it's why putting at least some of this into a book at this point is a major step forward for research into these communities. And I can't believe I got to be somebody who helped do it. It's, it's a blessing to me, all the friends I've made and the great people I've met as a result. Now, I do see a question in the chat from Dennis Conley asking the birth and death date for Maria Jackson, the Catholic woman mentioned in the registry. She was born in 1810 and she died in 1888.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and close out. So many thanks to Suzanne Johnson and Jeff Sipek for joining us from the Sugarland Ethnohistory Project and sharing with us I Have Started for Canaan, the story of the African-American town of Sugarland. Just to remind everyone, if you're interested in finding the book, you can find it now on the mocoalliance.org website. That's MOCOALLIANCE.org. And thank you everyone again for joining us for the Knights of Columbus First Understand Lecture Series. We do have another one next month. Our talk next month is The Price of Being Blue, the Challenges of Policing in an Age of Reform. I'm Donald Patty with the Knights of Columbus. Good night and God bless.